Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for joining me for day 3 of APIs Revisited, part of Digital Leaders Week. And in today's API Hour, I'm joined by Richard Edwin, Principal Consultant at Scott Logic. If you have a question for Richard, pop it into the question box and we'll take as many as we can at the end. And if you haven't already signed up for the other API Hours that will be taking place the same time every day this week, I'll put a link in the chat box where you'll be able to view the schedule, book your place for the other sessions and view the recordings from the ones that you've missed. And if you don't already have a copy of Open Your Eyes to APIs, the white paper that accompanies this webinar series, you can download it by clicking the same URL in the chat box or by filling in your survey at the end. Now, if you've watched, should I say, any of the previous API Hours this week, you'll know that we're using our surveys to support a very good cause. Throughout Digital Leaders Week, Scott Logic is donating £5 to the Altitude Foundation for every completed survey. The survey takes just 60 seconds to complete, and I'll give you more information about how to access the survey and tell you a bit about the charity after Richard's presentation. And we'll be able to see just how much money we've managed to raise as a result of today's event. So let me now introduce you to today's speaker. Richard Edwin is a principal consultant joining Scott Logic during lockdown in 2020 and bringing with him 25 years of software delivery experience. Over that time, he's been a developer, solution architect, business analyst and delivery leader in a variety of digital consultancy businesses. He has full service lifecycle experience of shaping and delivering national solutions in defence, retail banking and public sector, bringing together modern technology, delivery methods and user-centered thinking to achieve the best value and success. When he's not helping customers address their latest problems, he can be found scraping off multiple layers of wallpaper as he refurbishes his house. And I don't envy you that task, Richard. Anyway, without further ado, let me pass you over to Richard. And if you want to share your webcam, there we go. Perfect. Over to you.
Thank you, Claire. Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining live or for viewing a recorded version of this session. I hope you're all enjoying Digital Leaders sessions so far this week. I'd like to use this session to offer a fresh look at how we use APIs to control the problem of legacy IT. The principles and benefits of using APIs to tackle legacy are well established, but legacy can continue to create problems due to us failing to design, build and operate those APIs well. We end up with APIs still driven by the legacy systems they're supposed to be helping us with. Our legacy systems dominate our decision making and make us lose sight of the value we want to obtain through APIs. So in this session, I'll identify some of the traps we fall into with how we think about and approach APIs when dealing with legacy. I'll also provide you with a refreshed and perhaps for some of you a new perspective on how we use APIs to successfully control legacy. We've all experienced of legacy IT problems. They never go away. The impact of legacy only increases over time. If unchecked, eventually a catastrophic legacy failure may trigger us into action, normally forcing unwelcome decisions that require us to rapidly replace or invest, all the while trying to maintain a service that's crumbling around us. We will all have stories of applications or systems that are slow, broken, unreliable, or frustrating to use. Every organization has a legacy skeleton in the closet. We experience the impact of legacy IT in our work and personal lives. Clunky and inefficient user interfaces. Change projects that are time-consuming and expensive to deliver. Corporate systems that reflect organization structures from 10 years ago, relying on manual rekeying of information and inefficient processes. Or perhaps the hot topic of last week, old Excel versions excluding important data records. It's something we all encounter in all walks of life. So legacy IT is a burden. It slows business and users down. And we struggle with it because it is hard to change and it is hard to move away from. But before we look at APIs, let's first confirm what we mean by legacy and legacy problems. Our interpretation of the problem will impact how we view the solutions to it. Treating legacy as anything that is old is one way. We all have old systems and services we rely on. They may look and feel a bit dated, a little bit rough around the edges, a little bit tarnished, but they still function, they still serve us. We may look at old as a bit quaint, familiar, possibly even a lower risk because it's a known quantity. And for those reasons, we accept old dated attributes. It works, it's okay. And while a little frustrating to use, there's normally not a compelling reason to change it. While we may be happy to live with old legacy, it is really the time that we should start considering how we move on from it, what our future plans will be when it does start to fail to deliver that value. So when legacy starts to be of limited value or risks start being realized, we may view it as obsolete. Something obsolete suggests it's no longer fit to meet current needs. It's got more negative connotations. It cannot keep up. It's stopped delivering value. And ultimately, it's holding us back. It's also happening now, in contrast to old. There's an urgency to do something about it. We're feeling that pain now. Decisions are more likely to be forced on us when something is obsolete. It's past that point of having time to plan and anticipate what the right thing is to do. And by necessity, we react to that situation immediately, reducing our options and being controlled by target for APIs and allow it to drive our decisions. Whether aging legacy systems are old or obsolete, let's consider typical drivers that require us to change legacy and how they influence our thinking. Typical reasons may include technology reaching end of life. This gives us multiple reasons to want to change. Supplier support is ending, so there are security and reliability risks. New features may be released, keeping us stuck. No new features may be released, keeping us stuck with the capabilities of the system today. Skills and knowledge may be hard and expensive to find. Other dependent technologies in our solutions may no longer be compatible, or we may desire the benefits of new features only obtainable by moving on to new product versions. Competition may be a driver for change of our legacy systems. Your competitors are perhaps moving faster, delivering better services and winning more market share. Your non-digital channels may be the competition, and there is a need to make digital channels an overwhelmingly compelling alternative for users. You may want or need to provide your users with experience that keep up with their expectations. As users, our expectations are set by other systems in personal and professional lives. Amazon, even the latest Office 365. They're all pushing forward experiences at a great rate. Like it or not, we compare those experiences with those highly tuned and familiar services. So legacy and dated systems really stand out. And during COVID, we've all become even more exposed and aware of the good and bad that different technologies and services we have to use deliver to us. And those that are old, dated, obsolete, become very apparent. We may be struggling along with features and functionality in our legacy systems that were designed and built for the world 2, 5, 10, 20 years ago. And we're not recognizing the efficiencies that the latest technologies, the latest processes, increased automation can offer us. And that's a reason why we want to move on from legacy. Or finally, there might be regulatory compliance that we need to align to and satisfy, be that financial, it might be accessibility standards, it might be security guidelines, or in the case of public sector, government digital service user-centered design values that we need to be exercising in how we think about the services we're providing. These are all common reasons we need to transform or change our services. However, our ability to do so successfully is always impacted to some degree by legacy. Legacy gives us too many reasons not to do something. We don't have the data. The system's not being built to work that way. We can't squeeze that requirement or feature from it. It's too expensive to make the change, and we don't want to invest in the legacy system. Our people don't have the skills to make the change, or it's too disruptive to the service that the legacy system is delivering. Our users and organization could not tolerate that impact. So legacy tells us there's a risk, there's unwelcome cost and uncertainty that stands in the way of those changes. And as a result, legacy removes options. It immediately constrains our thinking, persisting the problems we're trying to address and preventing us from recognizing the value that we want to obtain. We end up with our old or obsolete systems dictating what we do. And we either do nothing, foregoing the value that we're seeking and postponing the legacy problems for tomorrow. Legacy has us depending totally on it, and we freeze because we can't move forwards. We may decide to change everything, replace the legacy system with something new. This is the most expensive, risky, potentially complex option. We give up trying to control legacy because we can only see one option and don't know how to increment away from it other than throwing it all away and starting afresh. Or we may choose to change components or services over time using an incremental approach, but we do so wrong. We do so from a legacy perspective, thinking about it in terms of what it allows us to do and limiting our progress rather than thinking where we want to end up. And ultimately, we lose sight of the value we're seeking and are funneled into reduced options, overwhelmed by what legacy allows us to do. So why are APIs of value in tackling these problems of legacy? Over the past 5, 10, 15 years, many of you viewing this will have used APIs directly or indirectly to enable some of these changes with mixed success. Over the past 25 years, I've used APIs to address all sorts of legacy problems, connecting old and new military simulations together so that they can share data. I've enhanced e-commerce services with API-based payment providers or services to improve customer insights. And I've improved the efficiency of national public sector systems via increased automation. So there's many reasons why we might want to use APIs to address the legacy problem. And many popular references providing guidance will talk you through established reasons you may want to use APIs to control legacy. You may seek increased integration and interoperability to remove silos between systems. In doing so, you recognize the efficiency of allowing a system to talk to another system without manual intervention. Why build that capability into those legacy systems when it's available from another source that you connect to through APIs? Data's the new oil, everyone says, right? We can see the value in APIs to expose, share, and combine data to improve intelligence and drive better decisions or insight. Combining data exposed via APIs with technology enables us to deal with volumes and analysis at a scale humans are completely inefficient at, and to visualize it in real time and take action as a result. We may use APIs to create a new channel that can be monetized and commercialized as part of an API economy. The value that's been built into a legacy system over the years can be unlocked, providing consumers with a service they can integrate into their device or system of choice. Or we may simply be seeking flexibility. APIs help us break the problem down with lower risk, reduced investment, and offering us new ways to deliver and consume services. Importantly, with all of these ambitions and goals of using APIs to tackle legacy, APIs offer us one thing, and that's options. They provide us with more than one way to progress, and that's despite the constraints that legacy itself is continually trying to impose on us. So brilliant. APIs offer options and help release us from the constraints of legacy. So why am I advocating a fresh look at how we use them? Well, many attempts to address legacy through APIs don't deliver on our expected value. APIs done badly fail to control legacy. In fact, they allow the legacy problems and issues we're trying to address to persist, and at worst to grow into additional problems. And this can happen for several reasons. We may approach APIs and legacy as purely a technical exercise. It's the easy part, isn't it? Just put an API on it. That will solve the problem. It will allow us to move on from today into tomorrow. And that approach may be driven by putting faith in a technical product to release the value, but without considering how or why the business or users will recognize those benefits. We may even make the mistake of building the API on the legacy technology, increasing and compounding the dependency on the legacy that we're trying to move away from. APIs may be a bad strategic fit to the problem we're trying to address. They might be introduced because they're the buzzword that's going around within the decision makers within an organization, but they're inappropriate to the need or the problem that we're trying to solve. As a result, APIs may be designed and implemented in the wrong way, with the wrong controls, and end up maybe unused and presenting an overhead because something needs to sustain them and keep them going, or perhaps overused and introducing unwelcome load or demand on services and support functions that weren't considered when introducing them to solve the problem. There can be a proliferation of APIs where they are introduced over time to address legacy. Different teams, different preferences, no coherent strategy, reactive decisions result in a spaghetti. No one knows what exists. There's duplication, APIs are hard to find, there's an overhead in the cost of maintenance. It's inefficient because we're duplicating implementation on new projects. And ultimately, we only succeed in creating a lot of smaller problems alongside the legacy problem. APIs may be viewed as a sticking plaster to the legacy problem, treating them as a temporary measure to fix an immediate need, get us over that until we get into a new solution to move forward. While there may be legitimate cases where an API is required as a short-term solution, how often do you see a short-term solution turn into a dependency? API services have maybe not been properly considered in terms of scale, reliability, security, support, and we end up having to add them later on to protect the underlying legacy system that's now become exposed. And we're simply adding more and more burden and dependency on that legacy system and letting it control us. Badly done APIs will project legacy problems. All the bad things we're trying to progress and move away from will persist. All the value we're hoping to deliver will be unrecognized. We end up simply wrapping the legacy functionality with a new interface that provides an alternative way of accessing the same legacy system, but also the same issues, data, slow performance, dated process, all those frustrations and irritations and risks persist there, just with a different way of connecting to them. We fall into the trap, of thinking from the legacy perspective and what it can do rather than what the API allows us to do. And finally, Gartner estimates that APIs will be the largest source of data breaches by 2022. A combination of all the factors on this slide can create security vulnerabilities. When old security models suited to human users and different ways of access are projected, vulnerabilities appear. When APIs can be accessed programmatically, vulnerabilities occur. When activity and load are introduced at new volumes, legacy and reputations can crumble. Because we've only thought about the technology and not the people or the organizations using the systems, vulnerabilities can be introduced, and our already aging and leaky legacy systems spring yet more holes. So if that's some of the ways APIs done badly can fail to control legacy, what if we hit reset and take a fresh look at how we should be treating and approaching APIs so that we avoid those pitfalls and we use APIs effectively to control legacy? We need to avoid thinking, how can legacy be controlled by APIs, and instead think API first. Challenge ourselves, are we really making best use of the APIs to control the legacy? Or are we simply adding technical layers and hoping for the best? Are we finding ourselves beholden to the same features and constraints of legacy, but just with an API interface? How do the APIs we are designing and building enable us to move away from the legacy problem? So instead of focusing on what legacy can and can't do, we should instead focus on the options APIs should be delivering and fit legacy into those. Simply putting an API in place does not deliver value. We need to consider how we can use it to deliver that value. And APIs enable us to change and progress away from legacy. They're not simply that cushion to reduce legacy problems. They're actually an opportunity to move forwards. So we need to change our mindset to this way of thinking. We can reduce our chances of creating bad APIs that are short-term, sticking plaster fixes that simply dress the same problems in new clothes. So how do we do that? Let's consider some specific ways we need to think about APIs first. Let's identify the benefits that we should be using them to deliver rather than falling into the traps that let legacy overwhelm our thinking. So the first benefit and value we should be focusing on is APIs enable us to isolate legacy systems. They provide not just a new interface, but a wrapper around part or maybe all aspects of a legacy service, providing us with an opportunity to abstract away from legacy's influence and introduce control. An API should be used to avoid legacy projecting its problems. If we find ourselves simply exposing legacy system via an API, we're doing the wrong thing. We should consider what additional or new value can be introduced. That might be improving data quality or content. It might be increasing validation through that API interaction. It might be improving security by what we can build into the API. It might be using the API to enhance performance because we can control the load that's being applied to the legacy service in a more effective way. They're all benefits that isolating legacy allow us to introduce. We can also, through correct isolation and successful isolation, support change more easily through an API. An API built with modern tools and methods can be changed, updated, modified faster than most legacy systems, and it therefore offers organizations agility if we use it to isolate the legacy problem. So successfully isolating legacy avoids it dominating our thinking and ensures we use the API as a value driver and not the legacy system. By isolating legacy, APIs also help us avoid lock-in. They allow us to present a controlled interface to external systems and service, giving us options to replace the legacy system while maintaining a level of service which is required. So we may do that through introducing a new system in parallel with legacy via a new API, or substituting the legacy system with a new version, an alternative product behind that API interface. So by remembering that APIs can provide this value, our services is not constrained by what legacy is telling us to do and what we've bought into there, but by the future service that the API presents and allows us to support going forwards. APIs provide options to control the transformation from current to new state at a pace that your business and users can tolerate. We can break legacy down into smaller problems and start small. Design and build one API that addresses a common feature or function, maybe a simple status lookup or something really, really basic. And we can control the resources that requires, both technical resources and human resources. We can control the impact that has. We can estimate the usage because it's of a size and shape that we can easily get our head around. And we can measure the performance of that API against those estimates and inform through better intelligence the next API and how we scale beyond that. We don't have to plan and deliver everything at once. We can tackle the problem as and when we're ready to do so. And if an API isn't delivering the expected value, it's easier to refine or remove. The risk is lower, the cost is lower. It's the API that we're tuning and tweaking. We can also develop and mature our API controls and governance gradually and improve that as we learn and proceed. And also through a control transformation, we're able to introduce skills into an organization in a more gradual way. So we may not have the sufficient technical personnel and knowledge and the right skills, be too ambitious initially. APIs allow us to control how those skills, that training, that knowledge is built over time as we move away from legacy. Related to controlling transformation, APIs therefore enable us to experiment with how we move away from legacy. We can use it to offer different services alongside the legacy service without impacting the majority of users. We don't want to experiment on legacy itself directly because it only compounds the problem if we're adjusting that, or the cost of change or the efforts involved or the risks involved are unwelcome on the legacy system. APIs allow us to do that separately with reduced impact. So for example, as users introduce new systems themselves that are connecting to our legacy system, they may want to increase automation through system-to-system interaction. And APIs would allow that model to be explored without the cost, risk, or impact of having to invest fully in a new system or replace all features or functions. We can break that down and experiment and test it. We may use APIs to create new user experiences, prolonging legacy lifetime and relevance, supporting transition to new ways of working, granting time while back-end legacy services are transformed or replaced. Your legacy systems may not support the channels you want or need, but a focus on creating APIs can help with that. APIs let us target what users want and avoid falling into the trap of only implementing what legacy allows. For example, consider a legacy application that only has a PC-based browser interface. It requires employees to return to base to enter and upload details to use the system. With APIs, we can support development of a mobile application, taking advantage of mobile features like GPS-driven location services, the ability to enter details whilst in the field, validate them, and synchronize back to the legacy system when a signal is available. All the while still accessing those relevant legacy services and data, but without needing to change the legacy system. Finally, we can use APIs to obtain metrics on previously blind areas of legacy services. We mustn't fall into the trap of thinking just because our legacy system does not currently present the data that it can't be surfaced. We may decide to build a new API that's solely focused on instrumenting the legacy system. We connect our latest analytics and visualization tool to it, gain new insights, and use that to reduce assumptions and inform how best we move forward from that legacy system. When implementing new APIs, we can easily include instrumentation by default, baking in those insights and those metrics as we experiment and explore. So we can use APIs to help us understand how legacy is impacted by those new API-driven services. We can anticipate when volumes or load are starting to make the old or obsolete legacy system start to fail. And with measurement and insight, we can do so in a controlled way, reducing assumption, reducing estimates, and reducing the hold that legacy may otherwise have over our options. So by thinking API first, we focus on the benefits and value APIs provide us to control legacy, rather than fall into the trap of letting legacy dictate how we use them. By thinking API first when tackling legacy, we stand a much better chance of succeeding. We remember to look forwards to how APIs increase options to help us to progress away from legacy at a pace that we, rather than legacy, controls towards a sustainable API model. So putting all of that together, what does API control of legacy done right look like? What's required to make that transition to think API first? First of all, put in place an API strategy that sets out your guardrails, your principles for your APIs. James Hewitt from Scott Logic will cover this in another Happy Hour session tomorrow at 3 p.m. With an API strategy in place, you can set realistic goals, start from the right place, measure progress, and ensure you put in place the resources and controls required for sustainable and efficient operation. To avoid some of the pitfalls, you may require help and support to put a rounded strategy in place, or to review your existing approach to avoid the traps that we identified earlier. Look for and use open standards in terms of API specification, technologies. By doing so, you help prepare for those challenges or needs yet to be encountered. And you can maximize the usefulness of APIs and avoid those short-term sticking plaster solutions. Open standards can range from open APIs that were covered in a Happy Hour session earlier this week by Nick Betts from Scott Logic. It might be specifications that are described in Swagger. Or it might be just your technical choices using things like JSON that help you in several ways, from improving chances or growing relevant technical skills within your teams and personnel, through to supporting integration with other systems because they themselves support those open standards. We've mentioned this already: build in measurement to track, to manage, to understand. You want and need to know how effective your APIs are, how they're being used, if they're being abused, if they present a security threat. And APIs grant you more ways to understand, control, and tune all of those interactions with your services. So including measurement from them on day one is essential if you're going to want to control them. It's like, rather than having one dial to change and tune your operations, you've got multiple options that you can use, but you need to know what each of them mean so that you're able to adjust them. Approach APIs as an ongoing exercise. Today's APIs will become your legacy tomorrow. So as part of your API strategy, define what the life cycle will be for each API, the support, the services, the skills that will be required at each phase of their life. By doing so, you ensure that they're operated as sustainable services that can cater for changes in usage, dependencies, outside needs, or even opportunities over time. It's important to design your APIs from the perspective of the consumer or the user of the API. Consider what's of value to them and what they will want in the future, so that by doing so, you immediately start to isolate legacy and you don't constrain your thinking to what your legacy system can do today and the pace of change it can sustain, and you start to think forwards and outwards as to what it's got to do to be successful for those it delivers value to. And finally, remember to fit legacy into your APIs and not the other way around. When you use APIs to tackle legacy, they're the opportunity to move forwards and progress. Don't let legacy control them and control where you're going. Use the APIs to release value. Don't try and squeeze your legacy systems to do so. So putting all that together, you can summarize it as follows. Don't let legacy control your APIs. Avoid implementing bad APIs that are not based on an API strategy, that simply wrap legacy and project its problems, that only consider today and not tomorrow. And instead, think APIs first. Use them to drive transformation as part of an API strategy. Isolate your legacy problems by focusing on what the APIs can do and how they can enhance the services you provide, rather than being stuck on what your legacy system can do today. And ultimately, use those APIs to generate and provide options and ultimately time to make that transition away from legacy in a controlled way. Thank you all very much for listening and for your time today. I'll hand you back to Claire.